Welcome back to the Cutting Room Lore. I am Nick. This is my co-host Chris.
Yeah, and it's episode 4, and we are joined today with a special guest. Special guest, reveal yourself.
Hello, my name is James. I've been at a player at Christian's Table for about 2 years now.
Oh my god, 2 years.
Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it? Pleasure to be here, gentlemen. I'll take my seat as the first guest on this podcast.
The most honored throne of first guest. I'm sure that there'll be some people listening who are fuming.
Cough, cough.
Very honored.
Yeah.
Well, how Seb? He's our top viewer. We can't,
That's true.
Yeah.
We can't have him on. It would be too much of a paradox. He'd be giving notes on himself.
Mm-hmm. But as I'm sure Seb has had many notes from last session, we will kind of break the glass, the tinted window, and reveal that this episode is being recorded before Seb has had a chance to look over and provide his feedback.
Yeah.
So if there is a massive dip in quality, blame it on Seb.
Yeah. the only missing link in that equation there, Seb.
Well, anyway, beginning. James, not Creme.
Oh my god, it's going to be so confusing. I'm going to have to rename your. So just behind the curtain here, I have had I'm ashamed to admit this, but because we've never met in person, I've had a really hard time with remembering that you are James and not Matt, and this has been a constant problem for me over the last 2 years.
I see. Well,
I am really sorry. I've tried my hardest, but every so often I do have to ask Chris, James, it's James, right? He goes, no.
I didn't realize we were that similar, but I mean, now that you mention it, maybe we are. Our voices do, I don't know, blend a bit, I guess. I mean,
think it's because I met you at the same time, and we've never had any extended conversations where we ourselves have initiated it. It's always been at the end of some other chat.
It's true. It's a shame, really, But I mean,
that's all on me. That's my secret shame that I want to get out here before the FBI bust my ass on it.
No, it was a really shame that you weren't there for the in-person session we did.
I know. I know. It's a shame.
It must have been talked about here, right? That was one of the crowning gems of the campaign. That session was amazing.
I can't. I'm too angry. I will not get into why and how I was not able to make it to that stupid session.
Well, either way, moving past the events of that actually rather thematically kind of picks up where we left off at the end of last episode. So James, for your context, at the end of last episode, we kind of covered everything that happened from the end of the Brindle arc through the kind of charge of the Light Brigade, or the charge of the Not So Bright Brigade, as we've dubbed it, through the Scar, rescuing Krem's brother, arriving back at the Green Mount at the Greenhold, discovering Jonah was dead. Thexan then deciding that he wanted to go on a murder spree on any priest that appeared. You guys getting interrogated and captured, and then finally now deciding to then head towards Huron's tomb. And we finally finished by covering the Cremicide incident.
Yes. The Cremtion.
Yeah.
Sorry, before we go into that, I just have to defend Seb a little bit here. That even though he was the one who struck first at the priest, we can't forget Lorena was the one who burned the man inside his own armor and then set fire to her family's own inn.
I forgot about that.
There was.
I got you back, Seb.
Oh fuck! Lorena was a walking war crime. She was.
Yeah, the minute she started learning evocation, it was all over for us.
Yeah, she would go near you and just Vietnam War music intensifies, and it was just constant napalm, that or mortars via way of erupting Earth. But we kind of wanted to bring you in because after this session and the events that happened when Krem kind of flashbanged an entire audience, you brought a new character to the table.
That is true.
Before we do get into the new character, though,
Mhm.
I feel like it's important that we go back and I want to sort of go through that ascension again. And I want to ask you, what was Krem thinking? Like, what were the events that led Krem to this decision?
Oh, I see. Well, it's something I've explained to the players a lot, but I realized at the time it might have seemed a bit confusing because I didn't
Yeah,
really
at
make
the time
people-
we were like at a complete loss because
It's
you
true.
know.
I didn't really explain it, but that was kind of the point, really, because you see, Exton the Scar returning to Greenhold. Krem was starting to, for a long time, he'd realized the idea that his powers came from a very dark place. Of course, it was his connection to obviously the ultimate evil in in his setting. But Krem thought he had to keep these powers for the sake of being useful to the party. He thought without his magic, he wouldn't be able to be helpful. So he kept the coin. He kind of guarded it, because he thought it was the only way he could use his magic. Because he had two magical focuses, which were the flower given to him by his brother, which he used to cast more light adjacent magic, and then of course the coin, which was used to cast the more kind of evilly kind of magic. He lost the coin after Exton the Scar, because of course betraying the Dark One, he was kind of the coin was taken from him because he betrayed him by saving his brother and going against his plans and whatever. And now he just had the flower. Of course, this is when we learned that Jonah died, and it was a moment for Krem where he essentially planted that flower on Jonah's grave. So leaving Greenhold, he was without a magic focus, and Krem didn't explain that to anyone in the party because he wanted to try and become useful without the use of magic, which is, I felt like it was a good story beat for Krem, but like in a technical like D&D sense, trying to respec your wizard into essentially a martial class does not work very well, as they found out in that first encounter when we fought the guards at the foot of that monastery where Gronk got captured and the interrogation session happened, because Krem hit someone for like 4 damage with the quarterstaff, and he was basically disregarded as a threat and not even interrogated because they didn't think there was anything going on there. But essentially, this kind of built up over Krem with this thing of feeling more useless without magic, not being able to cast anything now, and of course, there was also a lot of jumps between sessions. I was very inconsistent in showing up for things during this time because I was doing a job over summer and I couldn't show up for a lot of sessions. So I was jumping in and out of the story, and this kind of accumulated to this session where there was we were about to head to the new world, and there was this big thing the party had over whether we could enter this gauntlet, this arena, and try and win an airship to fly over there, or a boat, which would obviously be a lot slower. Krem volunteered to go into the gauntlet because obviously Felix's character, our actual like good martial guy, Gronk, who would probably be able to fight in a gladiatorial battle, was not there. So Krem stepped up and went, kind of accumulation of this kind of like what would you say, this feeling of not being like useful and inadequate and wanting to prove himself, and he enters this gauntlet. And in his first fight, well, you know what happens because obviously you've said it there. So if I had to say what was going through Krem's mind, it was like, well, I've talked for a while. I gotta say something. I gotta let you guys chip in here. Sorry.
So it was like almost like a situation where he was trying to gain control of what felt like a spiraling situation, and by doing so, his first response was to kind of let go of the hot pan that he had in his hands, and then quickly realized that it was his only cooking implement.
Of course, it
Is
I
that
think
was.
that's a
too
bit of a
much
stretch of a metaphor. And I think I understand. Like, so Krem was relying on the magic, and in his eyes, if he lost that magic, if he lost the coin, if he lost that connection by sort of essentially doing the right thing and severing his ties to the Dark One and this evil entity that was giving him power, like that would be it. He would just be a regular person traveling with them and would not be able to contribute.
And yeah, I couldn't
Yeah,
put it above
I guess
myself.
in a way, he was proven right, because when he went into the fight where magic wasn't allowed, he was beaten within an inch of his life.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that's when, at his weakest moment, he actually calls back to the Dark One and says, he basically has to give in because he's moments from literally being beheaded by this gladiator. He, in his weakest moment, he like kind of unintentionally puts himself in the exact scenario the Dark One wants him to be in, complete desperation where he has no choice but to turn to him. And that's when he loses control.
That's the most tragic, because Blum was he was in the stands with something ready. Like, he had readied an action. He was ready to fog cloud, leap in, wild shape, all this stuff. But having made this deal, I mean, what did you have to roll to actually get the deal to succeed?
I got a nat 20, and Christian said straight after the session that if I got anything lower, I was dead.
Wow.
Considering
of all the times,
it was very lucky, considering the basically however many sessions before he'd basically just spat or bit the hand of the Dark One. The Dark One, being egotistical, wasn't that willing to accept him back. And when you roll that,
so the Dark One is a spiteful god.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Wow.
So,
Okay, so that changes. Actually, that changes my perception of the Dark One, because in sort of it's weird in my sort of the way I've seen it so far as more of a sort of closer to the Lich from Adventure Time, where he doesn't really have any personal aspirations or vendettas beyond just his own purpose, and very practical and logical. But I guess so. For you, is he sort of it's more closer to that of a sort of Greek or Roman god?
Yeah, and I think in this case most of them were. So I've talked a little bit about this in a couple episodes, but in previous ages, in the first age, the Milesian Empire, which was this kind of elven, highly advanced, arcane society, effectively had gods walking around in their forms as avatars among them. And the Dark One, at least at the start, was one of these kind of very minor deities. And he was really someone that was quite spiteful and was a manipulator, even in that sense, among the gods. And so, at least the way that I imagine his mind to work is that he is this deeply self-conscious and paranoid individual, because he has had to kind of politic his way into the position, getting rid of other gods, taking on their kind of their attributes and their powers as he's done so, and hence why he's kind of an incredibly prideful being now, especially considering the reason he was able to kind of gain top dog status as the main god was because he tricked all of them.
It's like a sort of if Littlefinger became a deity.
Yeah,
It sounds almost like he's got a bit of a Napoleon complex going on there.
He does have aspects of Napoleon, distinctly less French, but yeah.
Well, speaking of aspects of Napoleon and distinctly un-French, I think it's only right that we sort of talk about what happened after you lost control of your character.
Right, of course. I mean, as I said, I lost control. What happens next really wasn't of my volition. It's something that I imagine Krem, having his senses, would never, ever in a million years do. I mean, Krem was a healer. He only wanted to help people. He very rarely turn to violence. In a sense, next he basically genocides a whole stadium of bystanders.
Yeah.
Which was, kind of a bit traumatizing for the character. I mean, even though Krem, he knows that wasn't him, he was being controlled, he still carries that weight way after the campaign of being someone who knows that, he has blood in his hands, you know what I mean?
And even after the campaign, do you feel like Krem maybe still thinks about the things that maybe he can't even remember doing?
No, of course, yeah. I mean, it haunts him, this idea that whole time while he was essentially possessed, all the horrible things he could have done, and not knowing what and the extent of the evil he committed is, it does weigh on him. It's essentially why, yeah, it's I don't want to say too much because I just remembered something I was told before this.
We can get into that when we kind of cover an inevitable episode at the start of the next campaign.
It's true. It's very far down the line.
Yeah.
But
I mean, after this event happened, the party then decides to go do some shopping before getting on a boat.
We had a very sad, I want to premise, it was a very sad shopping trip. This was the same shopping trip where Blum purchased a pair of gloves from a shady man in a stall on the street.
Yeah, the ouchie gloves.
Yeah, he got a pair of magical gloves. Oh, great. They don't cost too much. That's fab. They probably have a fairly weak enchant. And then Chris sends me the stats. Oh, fantastic. They've got some great spells. He puts them on, and immediately his hands begin to rot away.
Mm-hmm. I guess, Nick, what was your thoughts when you kind of realized these gloves were cursed?
Well, it's not just that they were cursed, it's that the gloves were possessed. And Blum had literally, that day, seen the effects of demonic possession.
Yeah, why you went to such a drastic solution for these gloves?
Chris and I had talked about sort of the nature of demons, and we spoke a little bit about this last time, about how sort of it's quite like that in 40k, where once the demons get hold, you don't get rid of them totally. Like it's almost impossible. Like they will always sort of get in one way or another. So, and it's sort of like time is of the essence. The longer you're sort of in contact with a demon, the worse it gets. So Blum was sort of in this race against time, at least in sort of my mind, to get rid of this sort of demonic power. And it was like a complete antithesis to Blum's recent sort of enlightenment. He had recently become a druid. I think at this point he had I think 2 levels in druid. Like I think because he could wild shape at this point. So he was fully getting contact with nature. He was like properly sort of getting down into the laws of life and how things grow and the sort of circle of energy in the world. And then he'd been cursed with gloves that belonged to a demon of decay and disease. Like a complete antithesis to Blum's deal. So he was just like, there was, anything less than the solution he sought would have been insubstantial in Blum's eyes.
Sorry, you just saying about having wild shape reminded me that it was actually quite a beautiful scene before Krem actually went into the arena where Blum tries to snap him out of it, talk him out of it, make him come to his senses and realize that he would not be able to win. And he, by, wild shaping into a bear and essentially wrestling Krem, Krem gets absolutely, decked by Blum in his bear form. And Blum basically, transforms back and says, you can't win. But Krem, being as conceited as he was like, I have to try. Krem was very much like that, a hopeful idiot. He made a lot of decisions, like, of course, leaping into the scar head first to save his brother, despite knowing the danger.
I would understand Krem's decision if the fight had been a normal fight, but it was clear from the advertising, it was a fight to the death. Like that was how they sold it.
Yeah, this wasn't really it wasn't like a YouTube boxing thing. It was
Yeah, we weren't going to see
uh,
Logan Paul and KSI duke it out.
exactly.
You know, a
Yeah, it's
couple
true. I mean,
bruises.
but Krem had been no stranger to putting his life on the line before. I mean, that's what jumping into the scar was really. I mean,
that is true.
That-
It wouldn't
that
be
is
his
fair.
first suicidal decision. Let's be honest.
I guess from like the other players' perspectives, because of course we didn't have the insight of the inner workings of kind of your thought process on it.
try to at least communicate to the players more because it would have made the decision I made a little less confusing to them. If I'd given them a chance to reach out to Krem beforehand, then maybe he wouldn't have done what he did, and the story would be completely different. But I feel like, sorry, go on.
No, I feel like depending on which player you would have talked to, you would have got varying degrees of help.
Well, I mean, because you had Holger who didn't care,
yeah,
and you had Gronk who wasn't there,
mhm.
and you had Seb who would have just nagged you and try and told you that you were an idiot. I mean, who was left?
I guess Lorena may have tried to talk you out of it.
But did Lorena and Krem really have like a relationship?
Well, actually, we can get on to Lorena and relationships later on, because meanwhile all this was happening, there was shipping going on the ship by a certain person in this call.
Oh, that's right.
Oh,
I remember. Sorry, I will try and find exactly what you are talking about in the memes.
get me, I'm
But,
lost. I actually don't remember this.
But yeah, I guess from the outside's perspective, it was that like what you'd effectively done is before in the scar, at least you were kind of going in for your brother. It was a bigger purpose, and you had full kind of like use of your magic at least. Whereas with this one, it was like it came out of nowhere, because I mean, at least from the other party members' perspective, they didn't know what was going on inside Krab's head. They didn't see the visions. They didn't hear what he was doing. They weren't there when he kind of abandoned the flower left by his brother. They weren't there when the coin was taken away. He didn't tell anyone about that. So they didn't really get a glimpse into the mind of what was going on. But again, that's not necessarily on Krem, because I mean, I'm not going to cast.
I want to make my position clear. I feel like Blum attempted to reach out.
Of course, I think that's what he did when he tried to, convince him not to take that fight. When he realized something was wrong, the minute he realized something was wrong, he tried to, help Krem, which I appreciate.
But given what you've just sort of told us about the actual sort of internal problem that Krem was facing, like how he felt like he was inadequate, maybe the way Blum went about his sort of persuasion probably didn't help. His sort of tactic was to sort of like hard, cold logic. You are not strong enough for this fight. But that was exactly the thing that Krem was trying to prove wrong to himself. So,
exactly.
yeah, I guess Blum couldn't have chosen a worse way to go about trying to convince him.
It could have all changed if you had just said, "You're not strong enough yet," and then the training begins.
Yes, it's a powerful word. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yet that's what happened. And moving on afterwards, after the kind of the shopping incident, while Blum was kind of boarding this ship with his hands rotting, we're introduced to your new character, James. Do you want to? Who's your new character? Let's start with that.
Well, after Krem's departure, because of course after becoming possessed, he essentially, from what the party saw, exploded into a ball of kind of flame and ice, and he was no more. There was nothing left of Krem except the sword that he had tried to fight with in the gladiatorial arena, which I did appreciate. Fex and Seb's character actually picked up and carried with him and fought with after that point. to kind of, I guess, honor his friend, or he thought maybe with this connection to him, he could find him, or you know, or at least honor his,
Yeah,
his
it was
companion
touching.
who was dead. It was very sweet, and I was like, oh, yeah, that is really sweet. But my new character, hence because Krem was no longer in my hands, he was gone. I had to come up with a new character, and the character that I came to was what I'd say is far away from what Krem was as possible. I wanted to play someone who was the antithesis, but still had the same kind of spirit as being kind of good-hearted, good-natured person. Because it's the kind of characters I enjoy, really. People who can interact with the world, not with a kind of naive sense, but with like a, can look upon it with innocent eyes and ask questions and get to know people. And that's where I came up with the idea of God, which didn't really start out with much of a story. It was more built off the first session I played him, where certain things were established about God, and the story kind of came from that. Essentially, God was, I think, as Nick described him, like a 40k orc, and I think that's a very perfect explanation of really what he was. He was where Krem was a bit of an aloof but deeply secretive wizard and practitioner of magic. God was simple. He was the complete opposite. He had a very large weapon which he hit people with, and that was what he lived for. The idea of finding stronger opponents to fight and just enjoying, traveling and the adventure and being alive. You know what I mean? He had nothing that really weighed on him, at least nothing that he knew about. So ultimately, he was just a very free spirit.
He was a free spirit, and
I don't know if I've ever told you this, Nick, but going into episode 1, the basis of Gud's backstory before me and James had ironed out all of the lore behind this event was that Gud was a Triton,
yeah,
but he was effectively, from all he could remember, a fish guy on a boat that ended up on the boat because he was literally fished out of the water. And that was all we had working with it at the moment.
Yeah, it was like proper, you need to play a character, but you don't want to decide until you've already started the game. So you're not going to give him anything set in stone.
I think that the idea was that he had a very strong character, but the backstory would be based off of what I decided from playing God. You know what I mean? It kind of came naturally as I played the character, and I decided things about him.
That I really love. That was the sort of a similar ethos that I took with Jonah and Blum in some regard. But the God was like the next level because he started with like nothing. He had no memory. He was I don't know who I am or where I am or why, but I know I must kill.
So I think God had ambitions and he had hobbies, and that was it.
It's true. I mean, the thing is, it was all stuff that I really enjoyed about the character was that it was fun playing someone so simple. I mean, God enjoyed two things, which were fighting and fishing. His ambition was fighting, and his hobby was fishing. He enjoyed, the thrill of battle, but then also the calmness that came from just casting his line and, grabbing some fish to eat. And there were things there, obviously, because it tied into the character that was hidden behind the helm. Like, God was previously, before the amnesia, a general. He was, a militant. He fought for purpose, but now in this kind of broken state, he now fought just simply for his own enjoyment. Like, he didn't understand why he was drawn to battle, where before it was he fought for a purpose, a real reason, a true goal. He now fought for no other reason than fighting itself. And of course his love of fishing, his connection to water, and his draw to the sea and streams and rivers and lakes and fish themselves, because obviously that was his home previously before being fished up onto a boat and taken to the new world.
And I kind of wanted to talk about another thing that was particularly prominent about God as well, just on initial approach, was that he never took off his helmet.
No, but it's something I need to stress about God is that the face underneath was never really important to me because that helm was God's face in a sense. He, of
He's
course,
got like strong like Batman vibes from
Mhm.
his helmet. Like this is, but Bruce Wayne is the mask. This is my real face, like a Rorschach helmet.
well, I always saw it a bit more like Shovel Knight if you've ever played that game, where
Oh, I'm sure it does, but unfortunately I've never played it.
ah, damn it. But you see, this idea with God is that his armor was the character. You know what I mean? The face and the body underneath wasn't that important. Of course, it was for the backstory, but God, the character as he was, not the character that he used to be, was that helm. It was his face now, and I like that about him. It was kind of like I don't know. He was just very. He provided me with something very different to Cram, and it was enjoyable to have this new experience with D&D.
Yeah,
Was that the first time you played a fighter?
It was. Previously, I think I'd only ever been caster classes. It was the first time I played a martial class altogether, and I really had fun with it.
Yeah, just the sort of raw brutality you can deal out with a martial class is sort of, you don't get quite the same thing as magic because magic is sort of all or nothing.
yeah, and I think, well, moving back to kind of the character story, the party then decides to kind of head towards and through the Sea of Storms to Ariosk, and in particular the city of Harkonnen, which is the capital of the Ashen Plains, which was the kind of region or province that the party were heading towards, as that was the kind of land that bordered where Huron's tomb was.
Mm.
Blunt or Nick, I think you had quite a traumatic experience on this trip.
So, uh, Blum was asking around, so he knew he was cursed before they left, and he was banking on Thexan because Thexan was the most experienced person in the group at this point, and the most trustworthy. Like he had turned to Gronk before, but then Gronk turned White Cloak, and he was no longer, pretty okay with that because he was getting more magic and Gronk was getting less magic. And so Blum was losing his hands. Like they were causing constant pain, and he knew there was demonic possession, sort of something demonic about them. So he got, I think, was it Gud? Or it was either Gud or it was Gronk, or perhaps Holger, because he seemed like he would be willing to cut both of his hands off.
Oh, I can tell you exactly who it was. It was the ship's chef who pretended to be a surgeon.
Oh, I see.
He butchered knifed your hands off, essentially. I remember
Yeah.
this, and they got thrown overboard.
Yeah.
And, well, I don't know what did happen to those gloves, Christian.
Well, they're actually thrown into the ocean, and this was when you guys as a party had heard whisperings about a very powerful dragon that was in the kind of the area of the Sea of Storms, and in particular, it was in one of these smaller kind of islands known as Sulphur Pool. And you'd heard the name of Sarlaxis, the Blue Death, and you guys also then, after dropping these gloves, all put in, I think, tribute, some form of kind of a bit of gold, a valuable item, just to kind of have safe passage through the waters without Sarlaxis kind of coming across your boat and blasting it. And I think before this, just as you guys kind of got through this, you gave this tribute. You were then immediately attacked by a
Yep.
sea serpent.
Immediately.
And this was during a time where I think quite a few of the players weren't showing up. And me as a DM came up with a brilliant idea that the easiest way of getting your players to show up to a game is to say, if the party gets TPK'd while you're gone, everyone dies. because you guys are on a boat, and if the boat goes down, you're going down with a sinking ship. And I'm pretty sure in that fight, Gud had some pretty epic moments.
I gotta say, the best person in that fight was definitely Gronk, but he had a great tag team with Gud, if I remember. I mean, do you want to explain
this
the
is
battle?
good. Yeah, but this is good without like really strong magical artifacts. Like this was just Gud and his favorite hammer.
Of course, his mole, which actually
Sorry,
was
yeah,
very
his mole.
linked to his backstory, but we didn't get to see it come to fruition. But
Yeah.
but his mole was, you know, it was this thing he felt a very strong connection to, because essentially it was the only like proper piece of equipment he had. His armor was really very ragged and almost useless, and other than his helm, that mole was the, you know, only connection he had to the person he was. And even though he didn't realize the significance, he felt that deep bond with the mole. He saw it as his only friend, really. He was alone for a very, very long time, just drifting along on the sea, and that mole was his best friend for that time. His most trusted companion.
Truly tragic, but we did appreciate that it was a connection to a non-magical weapon that made it, you know, a bit more special.
Oh yeah,
he would have never traded up that mole as his weapon. It was that important to him. You could have given me a magic glowing sword that did 100 damage with every hit, and I get like 2 attacks with it, and I wouldn't have dropped it for that mole playing good. I would have said.
And I think
that's some serious love.
Since if you wanted, James, from your memory, what do you remember about that fight with the sea serpent?
Oh, it was amazing, because I don't know, but one of the main jokes about God at the beginning was this idea that he told the party that he fought a sea monster.
Yeah.
And no one in the party believed him. Of course, there's significance there, but he fought a sea monster, and no one believed him. And I found it funny that within 2 sessions, God had actually fought a sea monster with his new companions, which of course he instantly bonded with over that experience. He saw how strong they were, and he was just enamored with their strength, because that's what God respects. You know, it's like he likes. I mean, he doesn't really dislike anyone. He's very much like that, very starry-eyed, and likes being around people. But seeing these companions as being so strong, he wanted to be around them more, essentially. And finding that sea monster was amazing. It, you know, just comes up and it slams through the ship. The whole thing is coming down, and Gronk gets pulled underwater in its jaws, and God has to dive down and hit it on its nose with his maul to get it to open up his jaws and allow Gronk to turn around and smite it, in which he did and killed it in one hit. It was amazing. We really had
brutal.
a great piece of teamwork with that. And of course, Blum and Holger were scammering around the boat trying to get all the absent players' characters out from the cabins and, you know, bring them to safety. Which I gotta say, you know, I don't think we were ever really thanked for that. But we essentially, as the ship was sinking, dove back into the sinking wreckage to find all the players who hadn't showed up's characters and essentially save them. We made a lot of very like hard rolls to get them as well, and I think that was actually a really good you know, thing you did there as a DM, Christian, if I can credit it. The idea that those characters could have died in that moment, and us as, you know, though they're friends, we didn't want to let their characters die, and so we had to put our characters on the line to find them and save them. That was really quite something. I did enjoy that a lot.
See, and the lesson, the moral of the story there is that spite works. And if players aren't showing up to your session, start playing evil tricks. But no, I'm glad you enjoyed that combat, because I think there were a couple of combats in that campaign that kind of, for me as a DM, were really kind of, I got to explore a new element of playing combat. And this one, I kind of explored the idea of one, having a secondary objective that you guys would have to try and fulfill, but also the idea that you guys are in a boat in the middle of the ocean, and every time this creature tries to attack the boat, it means pretty much that even if your characters live, if you've got no boat, you're stranded. You're shipwrecked. So that allowed you guys to kind of have other ways of winning the combat than just kind of sea monster, kill monster. But this then, I guess, leads to you guys heading towards Sulphur Pool, and a kind of long, maybe 2-session story about a dragon named Salaxus. And it first occurred when you guys headed towards not Sulphur Pool, but the nearby nearby kind of island of Sapphire Landing, which was kind of something you hadn't really looked into or kind of just known about. You just finished this combat and decided that this would be a good place to make some repairs. And I think once you landed there, you approached what looked to be a kind of abandoned naval port that had just been kind of left to rot.
Before that, I want to, because we had made it to a place, and then I think it was at this point that God decided that he was going to get out of the boat and swim the rest of the way.
Of course.
He got out in armor, and then as he inevitably began sinking, Blum had to turn into a bear and go rescue him.
It was quite a good.
So he
quite a good
swam out. Oh, it was. I mean, yeah.
God did some thinking, and sometimes he just didn't do the thinking.
If you need a better explanation of the character, God saw an island really far off in the distance and said, "Yeah, I can swim that," and jumped off the ship to try and swim that himself. And that's probably the best explanation of the character you're gonna get. Like that's what God
He's got
was.
like
In essence,
really
that is the
terrible
most
impulse control.
Exactly.
Like he gets like the voice in his head, man, I reckon I could survive that fall, and immediately jumps off a cliff.
It's so fun to play a character like that.
Yeah, well,
despite where it eventually leads
you. I mean, after we did save you, yeah, we approached the Sapphire Pool, and I would like to reiterate, this is a time when Blum has no hands. Like when he swam out to get Gud, like the only reason, like he didn't have any front paws on the animal form because he had no fucking hands.
No, he was Stumpy the bear.
Yeah, he was a stumpy bear.
Yeah. And I guess as you guys kind of approach Sapphire Landing, you kind of arrived at this abandoned port, and you had this encounter with these skeletons kind of rising from the sand. And after defeating them, you I believe it was Gronk. There was an item kind of placed tucked away on the side of the wall, and Gronk touched it. And when he touched it, he was teleported or transferred back in time to kind of give a little bit of explanation as to why this port was abandoned and why there were undead on it. And he was kind of given a glimpse into what had happened before and the events of the first age, and actually Huron's journey from Ariosk to Restria to face the Dark One. And this kind of became a story that we talked about more and more as the campaign kind of began to develop, and that was that Huron, this kind of mythical figure that fought and killed the Dark One, had traveled from Ariosk with a vast host at his back, and then landed and basically went and attacked the Dark One. And it's at this point that it was revealed that there was another civilization, which was the kind of the first Restrian Empire that was occupying these lands, and Huron's forces had effectively come in and murdered them. I don't believe it was the Restrians. I think it was the Milesian Empire with an S. And they had his troops had kind of come in and slaughtered this naval fleet in their sleep, landed, and then launched an invasion to defeat this Milesian Empire and then fight the Dark One. And this was when Gronk met Sarah, or as he came to later know, Sarlaxis, who was a dragon that had taken a human form. To cut the exposition short, Gronk rocks up. He sees a bard. This bard asks him to return something, to go find something for him. He says, "Sounds good." And then he's kind of pulled back to the timeline, and he guides you guys into a vault where you guys retrieve what looks to be a sapphire blue dragon egg. And then you guys then head from there to Sulphurpool. And I believe that is enough of a recap to get you guys to where we can start discussing. What was your approach as you guys begin to arrive at this, what would be an ancient dragon's lair, carrying what looks to be a dragon egg?
Well,
think-
do you want to go first, Nick?
Well, I was just going to say that Blum didn't really carry much expectations because, I mean, without his hands, like not to labor the point, but he was very preoccupied with the fact that he had no hands. He was very miserable at this stage of the journey. Yeah, and he was not optimistic about his sort of prospects of being in the party.
Well, I'll tell you, God was ecstatic for the prospect of fighting a dragon. It was really, really something that he was completely excited that he just landed on what he felt like was a random island in the sea, and apparently there was a dragon's lair here, and we were about to storm the place, and, of course, I want to say that God had no intention to kill the dragon that lived there. He simply just wanted the fight. Of course, he got a few of the details confused, and I don't think he ever really put it together that Sarah was the dragon. But he did make Sarah did make him a promise, which is really sad. I won't go into it because of course it's something that comes after, but we exchanged some stuff with the dragon, some stuff happened, and what God got out of the deal was that it was promised that after his adventure was over, he would return to the cave and he would fight the dragon that lived there. It's really sad he never got to do that. That was like it became essentially his end goal.
Yeah. You wanted to have a 1v1 fist fight with a dragon, which,
exactly.
To be fair, you did have technically a fist fight with a world-ending threat. It wasn't a dragon, though.
It wasn't, no. But who's to say? Because we'll get into the demise or possibility of survival of that later on.
Yeah. The important thing to note was that when you guys arrived, you guys made a deal, and Sarah then asked if you guys could safe keep her dragon egg.
Well, I mean, and another important thing is that as part of this deal, Blum got a hand. Sarah gave Blum a blue crystal hand. That was the sort of, because Sarah was a gem dragon. So it was this crystalline hand that sort of, electric blue, that felt natural, sort of almost like it wasn't a prosthetic at all, magically imbued. And that sort of, that was all the evidence Blum really needed that this dragon was a good being worth protecting. That sort of act of extreme kindness, saving him from complete uselessness in the future.
And it was then, I guess, you guys were gifted this dragon, which she hatched from the egg. And I think at this point is when I made another mistake as a DM, because I turned what would have been a massive issue into kind of a global issue when I gave the dragon the choice of choosing who it would decide as its rider. And of course, inevitably, I gave you guys all opportunities to try and bribe or convince the dragon to come to you in whatever way you wanted, this small kind of worm. And I think you offered a fish that you had caught, Gud.
Yes.
I think, was this the time you were carrying around the very smelly block of cheese, Nick?
I think it may have been the smelly block of cheese, yeah.
which inevitably worked against you.
Yeah. It was not great. Blum's he's not a very charismatic fellow, sadly.
And then Gronk offered him gold, which to a dragon is like meth.
Just straight up full bribery.
Yeah. Regardless, I still felt like, God had earned his shot to get like an equal footing as Gronk. So I got you guys to roll. And God, I'm so sorry, you just didn't roll nearly as high as Gronk did.
True.
And then
I
Gronk,
mean,
became a massive problem. Because a mini Hulk was one thing. A mini Hulk that could now fly, or would eventually be able to fly, and could have a dragon that could, breathe crystalline breath on them. Yeah, that would be a big problem.
You gave the Mary Sue of the party a dragon accomplice for him to commit even viler war crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you give him a pocket, Lorena?
If I can, I would actually still defend the decision to have given the dragon to Gronk, because of course Gronk was the one who had the vision. He was the one who agreed with Sarah to go back and find the egg. So I felt like he did have that narrative connection, and it did make sense that the dragon would choose him as his master. But I understand you have your gripes with the decision you made, because of course, from a purely gameplay, stand-in, it did make him very strong. But Gronk was always our strongest warrior, you know what I mean?
Yes, and he was eventually stripped bare.
You kind of turned him up to 11, I'd say, with the Dragon acquisition.
Yeah.
So if you could go back, if I might ask, who do you think you would have given the dragon to, if not Gronk?
Honestly, I don't think I would have changed the way that it shook out. I would have really hoped that you would roll better. Maybe, giving you a point of inspiration or something. But ultimately, because of the way events unfolded, Gronk having this dragon didn't really cause much of an issue.
No, so I mean, he forgot it was there.
No, I mean,
on more than one occasion.
I'll be honest, I'm still happy because I got to look after that dragon. God,
It's true.
even though
in a way, it was really your responsibility.
I mean,
after a
really,
while.
yeah. I mean, since Gronk, even though Gronk was the master of this dragon, I still got to care for the dragon in a sense. I was the one who foraged for food with my fishing trips. I would feed the dragon. I would be affectionate with the dragon. I even tried to teach it how to fight a few times. Because I felt like, the kind of person God was. He was very indebted to Sarah for giving him a sense of purpose in the world, and seeing that this dragon was very important to her, he felt it was also his responsibility as much as Gronk's was to look after and care for it. And of course, feed it, look after it,
Mm-hmm.
But I think, we all had a claim to the dragon. I mean, of course, we had the growing druid, animal companion. It would have been perfect for Blum, and I'd say God, I don't think much would have changed if he was using the dragon in combat, because of course he still looked after it. But I'd say, it made sense to go to Gronk in the end. And I'm still happy I could look after it.
And I think that was one thing that I wanted to touch on, because I've told you there are moments sometimes where, because God was so vague and so single-minded in his obsession over wanting a fight, that I was just like, God damn it, like, God, have other things you care about.
Yes, you were very. I remember you had a lot of back alley chats with with James about. Now I want you to think through what else. What else can you give me? But I don't know if it ever sort of stacked up, or at least not from what I could see in the game.
I think it was just like God had. Of course, I wanted him to be a single-minded character, but I wanted to let him develop in a sense with the world around him. The new world offered a lot of things, and God kind of grew by interacting with them. Of course, he made friends with Bob, who was the guard that essentially detained him after he beat up those criminals and dragged them through the city to jail. he kind of almost took him on as a bit of a squire, and he, of course, Bob introduced him to his family's cheese manga business. God
Yep.
then, despite being lactose intolerant, tried to, like, I guess, understand the cheesemonger business and claimed it was something that, another hobby on the chain with, fish, and he showed an interest for cheese there because he obviously wanted to relate to Bob, who was his friend.
Mhm.
I mean, God, I wouldn't say him being kind of one note really made him uninteresting to me or uninteresting to play because he still was able to build connections with people despite being very simple.
Mhm. But
You know what I mean?
this is the thing I appreciated about God was that he would take time to interact with NPCs or like things in the world, whereas especially at this point, I think cough cough, our favorite listener, kind of had fallen into the trap of becoming so single-minded on stopping the Dark One, preventing whatever
Yeah,
plan.
yeah. Oh, it's such a terrible thing to be focused on. Preventing the end of the world.
He was
Well,
just so
What a
enamored by your
crime.
narrative. He loved the main plot of the
yeah,
campaign. He wasn't interested in the side plots. He just wanted to get straight to the Dark One and kick his ass.
yeah,
I
Right
mean,
or
it's fair. Like, if you think about it in terms of like the hero's journey, they're fighting for the side plots after they deal with the main quest. Like, that's the sort of, my ordinary life is what I'm fighting for after this crisis is over.
And you got to remember, Fexen didn't have much left at this point. His father was dead. His best friend was dead. He, he
His
was a
cousin
shell at this
was
point.
getting crazier and crazier by the day, but they never really had like a very intimate relationship.
There was not much for Fexen to hold on to at this point, and I imagine that main quest, what he set out to do back when times were a little more simple in Greenhold, what his first objective was to slay the Dark One, and by the end of the campaign, that was really all he had left. It's quite sad, really, if you think about it like that. I'd say
well,
Fexen didn't become, you know, it wasn't that his character was lost, it was that he just became more and more focused to an almost obsessive degree on this quest that he'd set out with.
oh, he became obsessed, and look, I understand in that sense. The part that I think I'm kind of like hitting on here is that Thexan became so obsessed with the end goal that um, the kind of the details of the journey, like actually getting there, having enough money to get there, and not be starving, became less important. But also, kind of like character development for players also became less important. Um, and the part that I can kind of really appreciate with Gud is that while he didn't kind of evolve much in the campaign, he did engage a lot with NPCs, and he tried to have conversations with like the dragon. It was ultimately him that named the dragon because the dragon spoke to him first after you fed him, and you just assumed that the dragon's name was Thanks, and that kind of stuck.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that when everyone just took to that name that Gutted unwittingly named the dragon after the only word he heard it say. Almost like a Pokemon. It was quite funny that
It
everyone
was
just kind of picked onto that.
very Pokemon adjacent.
But I
Yeah.
guess the kind of the part that I really had hoped would happen with Gud was that he would kind of open up and have these conversations with the members of the party and not the kind of NPCs. The issue, I guess, though, was the first person you tried to have that conversation with was Holger.
It's true. So Holga was the most similar
Oh,
person
what a
to him.
choice.
It's just that Holga, it's a player and character both uninterested in that kind of laughing. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Unfortunately, but it was the person God decided to reach out to as the fellow glory seeker of the party. But then again, one of not to go jump the gun here, but God did have a conversation with Blum. It was it was after, I'll jump in really far ahead, but after he did something to Blum, a very short-minded goal, he threw him off a ship as bait
Oh,
for
oh,
some
no, no, no.
encounter.
We will talk about this.
And
We will talk
we'll
about
get
this.
to this. And he
I
obviously
will
straight after,
tell you when we need to talk about this.
it was because as I said, God is a bit blunt, and in his mind, he was never putting his friend in any danger. But both because he believed in his own strength and also the strength of Blum, that there was no way he was, die? There's no way. But after, it was made very clear to him by Blum that Blum basically was like, I could have died. What were you doing? He, was very honest, and he apologized, and he, said he respected him as a friend. And then that's when he tried to talk to Blum about, hey, after I fought that thing, it seemed like some things, I remembered some things, and I'm not really sure what it means right now, but in the future, can I come to you and talk to you about these things if anything more happens? Of course, something happens after that, and that couldn't really pan out, but
Yeah,
that was kind of
it's a
him
shame because
setting
that
up
was.
this
I
idea.
think that was a really good turning point for Blum and Gerd.
Yeah, it was this idea that, he made it clear after that moment that Blum was his friend, and he was sorry if if they didn't always see eye to eye, or if he felt like he was neglecting that. He said he tried to be honest, and he told him what he truly felt. And in that moment, when he realized he was opening up, he came to talk about something else. And he would have come to Blum to talk about those kind of developments in his arc going forward had it happened, I would say.
Yeah.
And I think just while we have you on, James, because I think it's opportune to talk about these things now. Before we kind of continue on next episode with the story and the recap, maybe we can explore a little bit about the parts that the rest of the players never got to hear that me and you talked about regarding Gut's backstory.
Of course.
Oh,
So-
now this I have been anticipating for quite some time.
So this was when, because imagine from the rest of the party, they all witnessed this fish guy rock up, never takes his helmet off, only wants to fight, talks exclusively to NPCs, doesn't really talk much to them, picks up Blum, throws him an enemy, apologizes immediately. But in the background, me and James had a conversation about what God had been before the amnesia had happened. James, do you want to give maybe a short synopsis of what you remember? Then, if there's anything that kind of comes up, I can add information to.
Oh, trust me, Christian. I never forget a single thing about God. I am very much connected to that character. Other than
Love
Karam,
losing
he's
you.
probably one of my favorite characters I've ever played. And see, as I said, how I viewed God was that helmet was his face. That was God. But Christian made it clear that there was something to be explored in realizing or molding the face beneath that helm. And that's where the whole backstory kind of spiraled from. It really was this beautiful moment of me throwing things out, and then Christian be like, "Oh, and what if we added this?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah," and then we add this, and it just crafted this beautiful narrative of turning God from a very like one note, 40k orc into this kind of almost like tragic hero who had made this great sacrifice that he was completely unknown to him and had completely almost killed the man he was and turned him into this this bastardization of the hero he was, into this wayward adventurer. And essentially how the story goes is God was a general, he was a militant, he was a hero to his people, the Trident. And the Trident, of course, what their purpose is that they are a very warrior-like race. They fight back sea monsters and the kind of things that lurk in the depths of the ocean. And essentially something comes along that is too strong for even gods who are, his battalion is the strongest of the Trident. And essentially this thing comes along and it attacks and he is not strong enough to take it out. All his men die, as far as he knew. And he is the last man standing. He, in his, final act of courage, tries to take this thing out, but fails. But the thing doesn't, essentially, it knocks him out, not killing him, but leaving him to drift alone on the ocean for God knows how long until he's fished up by this pirate ship and rescued, essentially. Of course, now he's with a head injury. He is sustained major amnesia, and this god is essentially a completely different character in a sense, in the way I view it. But the god before is a man who could never be reclaimed from the depths of his own mind. He can never return to that person, and the arc God would have had is coming to realize who he was, but never being able to return to it. It's, the tragedy comes from that he was a hero, but he exists as this thing now, and this thing has to understand, the weight of a history that he doesn't even know. One of the things with God was that he was being chased down and hunted by other Tridents who, who believed him to be a deserter, this hero who abandoned the Tridents, left them at the mercy of this wave of sea monsters that seemed to appear just after, his
disappearance.
His disappearance, and they hated him for it. But also, it's that hate came from a place of like, how could you do this to us? You are a hero, and you abandoned us. And of course, Tridents left the ocean to find God in the New World and hunt him down. We never got one of these encounters, but I really was itching for it because it would have been so fun.
Well, the thing is,
so I mean, two things have occurred to me. First of all, you took the phrase "fish out of water" for God quite literally.
Exactly, my fish out of water.
Just hitting me now. I can't believe that slept on me so long. And also, I'm getting like it's sort of a strange, it's sort of a mix, but he has a lot of qualities about his character, at least about his personality, that seem like in line with like Goku from Dragon Ball, like a really strong guy who is almost childlike as an adult in his sort of inquisitive nature towards the world, but also not understanding like what other people see as quite simple things, even though he's a very experienced combatant.
Of course.
And then I guess in his history, it's sort of like, even though it's his own history, it's more, it sounds like it's closer to sort of learning about the history of an ancestor, like of a history that's past and that he himself wouldn't identify with.
Of course,
And yet it's sort of a history that's still chasing him, which that's very interesting. And I'm sad that we didn't get to sort of explore that and we weren't ambushed by Tritons.
I mean, I did. I fought really hard to see the arc realized, but it did pass. Realizing, looking back, I'd say that was for the best. Because, to reprise the role of God isn't something I'm interested in anymore, if that makes sense.
Really?
I mean, okay, no.
Really?
Well, that's what I'm
You're not
saying.
interested
I mean,
in reprising the role of God? Well, maybe we should talk about
wait,
Quella.
wait. I spoke too soon.
Maybe we should talk about Quella.
No, I need to say this first. That it's the idea that what I've realized about D&D as a game is that characters exist in the moment you play them. You can pick up, you can put on, the costume or whatever, get back into the same shoes and walk the same paths and play the same characters, but they'll never be the same as the moments that you play them in. You know what I mean? That is how D&D very much is. It's of the moment. God can never return in the same way that he was because I played him at that time. You know what I mean? He couldn't be the same.
Yeah. As you have gone on, God would be different.
Exactly. I'd probably play him different. I'd approach him differently. He couldn't be the same person he was, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly, I don't think that me playing Plum would be the same. And actually, I sort of, when I reprised, minor spoiler warning here, I say minor because he was only there for about 5 minutes. But when I reprised Jonah later on, it did feel different. Like he didn't feel like he didn't really feel like the same dad. Because I don't know, maybe I've been playing Blum for so long, but you're right. Yeah, it was. I almost feel like it would have been better if I'd had no control at all. Because it was so different. Like it had been too long. Things had changed. Like at that point, I had gone from being a student at university to being, sort of part-time employed, totally out as an adult, and like too many things were different for it to have been the same.
Of course, yeah. I'd say that's the nature of D&D. The person changes, and so does the character, in essence, in tangent.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes to the end of this episode, because there were things that kind of happened to Gud that I think we'll elaborate on as the recap gets closer to them. But I do find it interesting because there was a lot of lore that we fleshed out about the area that Gud was from, and that kind of society, and the kind of the ocean and what happens beneath the waves. It's certainly an area that I think we might come revisit in a later campaign, if players are interested in. But I think that's probably all the questions I have. Is there anything else you guys want to add?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's more to be talked about with Krem, of course, why I'm here. But you know, there's a whole campaign behind that character. I don't think I could get into it all right now in the closing moments of this podcast episode. And of course, there's more to say about God as well. I mean, I hadn't even talked about his finest hour fighting the Rainbow Cop. And
Oh
we get
yeah,
into that.
the mythical Rainbow Cup.
Alluded to him by Smokey Joe. It was a really, I think, if nothing else, having that moment where I got to play God and have that encounter was, it was the peak of his character for me. It felt like everything I wanted. So I got to thank you as a DM for giving me that.
I just personally, as a DM, when I created the map for the area, and your immediate response as a player was, "Is that a fish?" And I was like, "Yes." And you were
Let
so
me
ecstatic.
just write up the stats for a fish.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to give him this option." So yeah, I was really happy that you enjoyed that.
Yeah, it really was throwing my character a bone, and God, the rabid dog that he was, just chewed it up instantly. It was great. I loved it.
Well, so next time, I guess we will be talking about the arrival in Ariosk. Talking a little bit about the different factions. I know that last time I mentioned that I'd like you, Christian, to sort of explore a bit more of the nuance between the different noble houses and the Viking sort of culture present there in Ariosk that we sort of majorly skipped over in our hurry. And I suppose we might even continue on to the network of sort of extra dimensional ways that we got a small glimpse of in the deserts of Ariosk.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, of course, that's something that really interests me. The ways is interesting because in the nature of Nick's own one-shots, there exists two canons for the fate of three characters. One of Nick's explanation and the other of Christian's explanation. I like that the characters exist almost like in these two canons because they both feel like good conclusions for the characters. But I imagine that will come after the encounter itself was talked about and everything prior leading up to that.
Oh
Yeah.
we're gonna divulge all into the theories. We'll put our tin caps on as we discuss what might be happening to those characters. But other than that, thank you so much for any listeners. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, James, for being our first guest.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was an honor. I mean, really, we just got to sit around and talk D&D, and I love that. So, I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me, really.
It was a pleasure as always, and we will happily and we will force you on to discuss certain events that happen later on.
In fact, I think Chris, there is one event that we need 3 people on for, just for them to describe why, and for them to hear their terrible justifications. I think that we do need to get that down and record it.
God had a very good explanation for.
I mean,
not
based on your responses from today's podcast, I think we know the reasons will be.
Yours were a bit clearer. The other
think
two,
yes.
It was a decision made.
Yep.
But yeah, we will get to that in a later episode. But once again, thank you so much for all the listeners, and thank you so much, James, for coming on. And yeah, we'll see you next episode.
See you next time.